But then we see an even bigger number. That the number, look at this. This is very interesting. So the 4 angels were released. This is chapter 9, verse 15. The 4 angels were released, who have been held ready for the hour of the day, the month, and the year, to kill a third of humankind. The number of the troops of cavalry was 200 million. Wait, what? Cavalry? What? Where'd that come from? So suddenly, these angels have become 200 million cavalry? And so there's suddenly a big shift. But what is represented by 200 million horses? It's a big number, right?
Couldn't it be saying that each of those angels were representative of, since there's 4 angels, each would be 50 million cavalry?
Yeah.
And that's just, the cavalry is just to show the power, the speed, the aggressiveness of that particular angel. And then it's just 200 million to show the sheer might and power.
Yeah, I definitely think that the number is just to suggest the immensity of the forces that are being released here. Again, it's a vision. Not everything's going to be nice and neat, but the idea of the sheer power that is present in an angel. Think back to what we talked about a little bit ago in 1 Kings, about one angel in one evening killing 185,000 soldiers, probably without even working up a sweat. Right? And so angels have an awful lot of power. And so maybe that, they use switches there to kind of say, this is the power. It's an overwhelming force. It's incalculable. But what's very interesting is to think about those early Christians receiving this message and hearing that number. Twice times 10,000 times 10,000, which calculated out as 200 million. Some estimate that the Roman cavalry at the time numbered about 125,000, with another 125,000 in reserve. So 250,000 cavalry the Roman Empire had, which means this is, 1,000 times bigger than that? Somebody check me out on that math? I mean, there's just the immensity of this force compared to any force on earth. Now, it's no wonder that a lot of people that have looked at this as a futurist have said this is something to do with China. So probably, because who can match that kind of force? But again, the number is meant to suggest the overwhelmingness of this, not an exact number of beings. So, an immense size. And then John begins to describe this cavalry, again, symbolizing what's being suggested here, what's coming. And again, both are related to these war animals ready for battle, just like the locust. The riders on these horses wear breastplates. Now, the wording here, how it's worded, could suggest that there's breastplates on the horses as well as the riders, which would be a common thing. You're protecting your horse just as much as you're, protecting yourself. Because war horses were very important parts of cavalry, and so there was a lot of protection offered to them. The color of those breastplates are of fire, of sapphire, and of sulfur. And so this kind of fiery red, blue, like smoke almost, is the kind of color we're talking about here. Some translations might have hyacinth instead of sapphire. And then yellow. These are not meant to be good colors. When you think about these colors, these are not positive colors. You're thinking of the colors of fire and smoke and yellow. And of course, you can't help but read about sulfur and think of the smell. Right? But definitely the color is what's being suggested here. So here too, there's something demonic about this cavalry because they're connected with fire and smoke and sulfur. Here too, it might also be related to the Parthian cavalry. Remember, the Parthians are the empire just outside the Euphrates River, who were known for their cavalry, who were known for wearing bright colors, the whole concerns about invading armies that are featured here as well. The heads of the horses are like lions' heads. And the locust's teeth were like lions' teeth. The horses' heads are like lions' heads. And if that wasn't bad enough, fire and smoke and sulfur are coming out of their mouths. Again, probably evoking Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? The fire, the smoke, the sulfur, all of which are connected there in Genesis 19. But also the lake of eternal judgment, the lake of fire that we'll see later on in Revelation. It's connected with fire and smoke and sulfur as well. By these three plagues, says John, and the plagues of the fire, the smoke, and sulfur, a third of humankind was killed. And then it goes on to say, it talks about the power of the horses is in their mouth and their tails, and how the tails of these horses are like serpents. Very figurative feature here. And so once again, we kind of have these invaders, so to speak, that have demonic characteristics as well as army characteristics, perhaps suggesting both of them working together as well. So a third of humankind to be killed by these plagues. But what about everybody else? The rest of humankind not killed by these plagues, as we've noted already, did not repent. Why not? Why is it that people experiencing these kind of things, even symbolic representations of things like this, even symbolically we might say that something bad's happening, even if it's not cavalry, even if it's not locusts.
The same thing is happening now. People are experiencing horrifying things, but instead of saying, God thinks to do this, they're like, how can I be a God? When there's all of this pain and suffering. So, could be something like that. Yeah, that many people in the face of physical or emotional trauma will deny the existence of God, will say that this proves God doesn't exist. And so, these things are meaningless or random. The other thing to think about is how sometimes people will persist even in bad habits that are damaging to them. My wife is a nurse, and she has told me stories about people who have a hole cut into their throats because of the throat cancer, right? To be able to breathe, and they'll go outside and be smoking through the hole. If you're not a smoker, you can say, how could you do that? I mean, you actually had to have a piece of you cut out because of the cancer that developed. But the addictive powers of nicotine, override the reason, right? And so we can think of how addiction can drive people to continue and persist in ways that are damaging to them physically, mentally, and their emotional, the relationships they have. But people persist in them, and this is what we're kind of seeing here: is that people who have put themselves in positions where they are either denying the existence of God or they don't want to give up. They're so much enthralled with what they have. But note what it is. They did not repent of the works of their hands. It's kind of like this is the situation they've made for themselves. It's not like they've been forced into this. It's not a situation where somebody else has made them do something. This is the work of their hands, specifically connected here with the idols. But the idea is this is something that human beings have done. Nor did they give up worshiping
demons. Do people actually worship demons? Well, yes and no. Yes, because it says they do, and we'll talk about why. Are there a lot of people? Are there some people perhaps that are true Satan worshipers? Yes, but the number of people like that is really small. Most of the people that describe themselves as Satanists today are in fact atheists attempting to make some sort of political or religious point. Right? The Church of Satan in New York is basically about freedom of church and state. It's not about actually worshiping Satan. But there are a few people, very small people that will consider themselves actually worshiping Satan. And so in that sense, not really. But what the Bible teaches, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, is that idol worship is actually worshiping demons. That it is a demon that stands behind the idol, behind the false worship. The Old Testament, several times this is said. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul makes this point in the context of the Lord's Supper. Specifically in the context of eating meat sacrificed to idols. You can't go, says Paul, to a temple and participate in the feast in the temple and then come and sit at the Lord's table and have communion. And can you do that? Well, you physically can do that, but spiritually, you can't do that. And God's not going to respect that. God's not going to accept that. Because what you're doing by going to those temples and participating in those feasts is participating actually in demon worship. So for Paul, for the Old Testament, when you were worshiping Baal, when you were worshiping Zeus, when you were worshiping any of the other gods and goddesses of these other people, you were actually worshiping demons. And so in one sense, here people are, they're connected with things they've done themselves. They are, in another sense, worshiping demons, but also they're worshiping things made out of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood, which cannot see or hear or talk. Right? So they've put themselves in this situation. Right? The works of their hands. They've done it themselves. They're actually worshiping demons, not true gods. But even the idols that they're worshiping can't do anything. Right? And so they're worshiping things made out of metals, of wood, of stone. There's an interesting passage in Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah. It might be Isaiah 43. Let me double check. I didn't write this down. Just kind of was thinking about it as I was talking. Oh, it's Isaiah 44. And Isaiah 44, Isaiah talks about worshiping idols. Here are people cutting down a tree. And they take some of the wood, and they use it to cook their food, and they take the rest of the wood and make an idol out of it. And nobody pauses to think, right? I'm cooking my food with part of this, but I'm bowing down before the rest of it. How does that work, right? And so the idea here is people are worshiping, when worshiping idols, they're worshiping inanimate objects that cannot do anything. But implicit in all this is, on the other side is a God who can see, hear, move, and do all sorts of things. Which again is a reminder to those that want to compromise. Which God do you want to serve? You want to serve somebody you've made yourself that can't do anything, or do you want to be on the side of God who can deliver, who can rescue, who can protect? But it's not just worship practices. It's also being caught up in some sins. Right? Murders, sorceries, fornications, thefts. Again, these might be literal in the sense of people being caught up in these things, or it could be figurative. Right? These sins standing in for other types of sins. Jesus said, if you hate your brother, right, it's connected with murder. If you lust after someone, that's connected with fornication. So it doesn't have to be the physical acts themselves. It can be this kind of internal disposition as well. The sorcery is, of course, connected with magic. So another type of, trying to have this spiritual control of the universe outside of God. Right? Particularly here, the idea is potions. And the word that's translated sorcery is also connected to our a word for pharmacy. That's not to say that pharmacists are sorcerers, but the word's connected grammatically. And so don't go into your local Publix and say, "Oh, great sorcerer! I need something that has beset my pains, and bring to me your potions that will deliver me from this." Right? But the idea of these potions, people turning to other sources instead of God, and all of these kind of sins that are reflected here are reflected with this idea of control. Why does murder happen? Well, oftentimes it's related to some sort of idea of control. I'm trying to control you, or I'm trying to control a situation, or the same kind of things with potions. Why were people doing potions? They were trying to control their health. They were trying to stop somebody, hurt somebody. Theft, the same kind of way. Fornication. A lot of people who engage in sexual sins are doing it out of, I want to control my own destiny when it comes to sex, or I want to control my sexual partner. Not about any sort of love or intimacy expressed in that. But it's often a subconscious thing. And I don't say everybody that is involved in sexual sins thinks about, I'm trying to control that person. But oftentimes a lot of these here are people trying to have some control, and God's taking away all the control. Right? He's sending them like locusts. He's sending them demonic cavalry. So the second woe is now past. But we move on into, as we go Thursday and Tuesday, into some intermediate visions where we'll see some space again between the sixth trumpet and the seventh trumpet. And so we'll pick up there